I've gone to the two coolest hinges. No one's made a hinge like that ever since. Welcome back to WANDEROUS. I'm your host. Just call me Crusoe, it's fine. In the last aforementioned episode, we did a deep dive into Oxford and had a lot of fun. My experience in England was very cyclical. As I'm retelling it now and reviewing all of the data that I collected in this very scientific exploration of the country and indeed of the island, because this was all building up to Scotland, which is not the same country. I'm realizing that I returned to places. I went back, I went there, I went here, I came back. I will go back to Oxford. I will go back to the British Museum, which is what we're going to talk about today. I don't usually record these so late at night, but I have been struck by inspiration, I suppose you could call it. I just feel like doing this. So you don't need to know when I record this, but I'm telling you, it's time. I'm really excited to share what I have to share with you today. I have a lot of notes again. I think that makes it, it's, the ones where I prepare, I think those are better episodes, right? I prepare a little bit, but I like to tell this story chronologically, and I like to make notes of tips for you, because the purpose of Wanderous is to inspire you to go outside your comfort zone and go to places you've never been, even if it's in your own country. And it's also to make you curious about what's beyond your own country as well. And we're going to cover a fair amount of countries over the course of this show. At least that is the plan. We're in England, and I have just come back. I'm just going to speak the story in first person present tense. I've just come back from Oxford. And I was really looking forward to coming back because I had been invited to a party on Sunday in kind of northeast side of London. And I believe I was being hosted. I was being hosted in a new spot in London. I was being hosted in a pretty fancy spot on like the 10th floor. We'll get to that another time. But I was invited to this party, and I met my Spanish host's friends, and I met his new girlfriend. Thankfully, he wasn't dating his housemate, who I think at this point had moved out. If you want to know what's going on there, that's a member's. Well, yeah, that's kind of a personal story that I only released to. I didn't want to make that story public. Long story, but I had this lovely invitation. Took the train up, got to the station. And the station says, you better watch out because this station closes at 10 p.m., buddy. I'm paraphrasing. And I was like, oh, okay, I better be careful because taxis in London, as you can imagine, are quite expensive. So there was this wonderful gathering. It was a small group of people. There was rumors of, this is probably just people's sense of humor, but there were rumors of like, I don't know, like group cuddling and vaguely kinky things. And I was intrigued by that. We'll see if that happens. But they had this whole, they were expecting more people than ended up coming, unfortunately. But there was this deck in the middle of this sort of like, it was really hard. It was a very odd kind of conglomeration of brick buildings. And there was this middle area that had a lot of sun. And there was a deck. And I helped them set up a tent. And it was nice seeing my friend again and meeting some lovely people. But you know how it is. The people who flirt with you, it's never the person you want to flirt with you. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. But met an author, and she was very excitedly showing me this poetry book she was working on and wanted some feedback on it. And she sent me an extremely large PDF. But that was a nice reintroduction to London. Ended up the next day finally seeing the London Eye. If you don't know the London Eye is this really big, you've probably seen it in movies. It's a very large Ferris wheel. It has they're basically like little spaceships that you go in, and they're like little rooms, right? And they go up. It's huge. It's just a massive thing, right on the River Thames, right on the river, right on the edge of this thing. And on the other side of the river, and this is a very famous location in London. The other side of the river is Big Ben, which is the beautiful timepiece of the city. I didn't realize that day just how sparkly Big Ben was because I didn't make it over there, but we're gonna, in fact, this episode is very much bookended by the city of Westminster, which is technically where Big Ben is. I was really lucky that I was there when I was there for many reasons, but I was lucky in terms of Big Ben because Big Ben had been under renovation for, I believe it was several years. It was at least a couple years, I think longer. And they just finished the renovation only months, maybe only 2 months, I should verify this, before I arrived in June. So I was very lucky to be able to see Big Ben not covered in also Westminster Abbey, the flag and everything. But mostly Big Ben, not covered with this mess of scaffolding, which I had been seeing all these photos of. Oh man, Big Ben's going to look like crap. It was fine. I'll be sure to share the photo of Big Ben from. There was this great little bridge, and this would be my first tip of the episode. When you go to London, I really recommend that you look up the Golden Jubilee bridges. So there's this really big bridge, an important bridge called Hungerford Bridge. Don't worry about spelling that. You don't need to. Just look up the Golden Jubilee bridges because they're on either side of the Hungerford Bridge. One is going, what would that be, north, and one's going south for the most part. And they flank these on either side of Hungerford. And they are these just lovely, lovely pedestrian suspension bridges that go over. And I did a couple little errands and got some food and saw some street performers. I made one of my earliest TikTok videos, actually. This is right around the time where I started doing TikTok. Was of this area, taking in a little video of a street performer near there playing. I believe it was a trumpet, and I can link that. If I'm gonna dig that up. If somebody comments and they want to see that, I'll get a link to it. But I'm not going to dig through it because there are more important links. But if you want to see that, comment. So everything was really kind of building up to me finally returning to the British Museum. I'd only been in there for like an hour and a half. And as I learned from my research that I did to prepare for this episode, British Museum is, probably not a surprise to you, one of the largest museums on the planet. I was sort of hypnotized by this place. I mean, it is what it is. I probably, because I'm such a nerd for Egyptian artifacts and the Egyptian art style. Ancient Egypt is something that hypnotizes me for some reason. I thought this place was actually larger than the Met in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Turns out it's actually half of the floor space. It's half the floor space. The Met is 190,000 square meters, which I have been to. And who knows? Memory is a strange thing. The British Museum is about 92,000 square meters, but maybe it's because it's separated over 4 floors. It felt bigger than the Met. It felt endless. When you walk into the British Museum, you are greeted, if you walk in on I believe it's the south entrance, you are greeted by this lovely panorama. And I took a panorama of this. I'm actually going to save this image to be sure to post it. I took 2 panoramas, but I'll post the good one. You enter this enclosed space that used to be open, but there's a central cylindrical building surrounded by these sort of like Greek classical facades that you can go into different parts of the museum. Now that this used to be open, but a while back they covered it with a kind of a glass mesh superstructure, which is nice because now you can be there, and when it's crappy weather, if it's raining, you can still enjoy that part of the museum, especially since it pretty much forms the hub of a hub and spoke model, kind of like in Disney, where everything just comes off from the center hub and spoke toward the middle of the park. This is really the center of the museum, but it's all glass, so it still lets in an abundance of natural light. It's very pretty. There are little bridges. There's a little bridge in the back anyway. So I return to the British Museum. I'm over the moon. I'm so excited. I have the whole afternoon to explore this place. It took a little while to take the overground train over there. I have until now. This is the only thing that kind of sucks. Good to keep in mind, and I think they've even pushed this 15 minutes earlier now, but at the time, it closes at 5 p.m., which is not unreasonable. In fact, it's pretty typical depending on what part of the world you're in, but I would have paid to, I was forced at one point to take kind of, as I mentioned in the other episode about the British Museum, one of the great things about the British Museum, and one of the reasons why I really recommend it, well, there's 1,000 reasons to recommend the British Museum. It's world-renowned. It's totally free. It's supported by tax dollars and donations. So one of the first things that really struck me about the British Museum was the Ghibelline mummies. And I will definitely include a photo. They have the original Ghibelline mummy that used to be called Ginger because it had red hair, has red hair, I should say. I'll get to the hair. The hair is, I never thought I would be like so hypnotized by, not hypnotized, but yeah, I'll get to that. Okay, so they're not supposed to call it Ginger anymore. There's some ethical policy, and they're not allowed to refer to it as Ginger. I don't know if it's because the original person was probably not. I actually don't know. Please, I don't know. I didn't research that part for this episode. I feel ashamed, but not that ashamed because I'm not Wikipedia, and I hope that you're not using this show as a replacement for Wikipedia because you will be sorely disappointed. The show is to inspire and entertain you and to help you live vicariously through one crazy nomad's adventures. So the Ghibelline, Gebelein, mummies were really, really special because they were the first bodies to be discovered before the dynasties of Egypt. So these aren't like Tutankhamun old. These aren't like Cleopatra old. These are almost 6,000 years old. They're really, really old. So the best estimate is about 3,400 BC, so about 5,500 years old. That's intense. So the fact that when you go to the British Museum and you look at, they have the first body they have on display behind glass, lying on its side. It's been incredibly preserved. For being it's a body, it's a person. I don't want to gross you out. I'm not going to describe it that much in case you're triggered by this, but this person still has hair and is covering, I think it's a male, covering his face. I might not be a male. I checked and it doesn't really say. But reviewing the photos even now, I'm just stunned. I'm stunned at how well preserved this person was. Inside, so they have it in a glass container, and they even had this 3D touch computer on the far wall where you could go through and you could actually remove layers, like when you could go through an animation, they would remove the bandages and then it would show it with just muscle and then show them with just bones. This body has been x-rayed more ways than maybe any other body that's ever existed. And they have a little sign inside of the glass case, which you can walk fully around, that says, and I quote, "The instrument below is a Hanwell radio transmitter. It accurately measures the temperature and relative humidity inside this showcase and transmit these data every 15 minutes by radio signal. This allows the museum staff to monitor the Ghibellian man in real time." Oh yes, this is the man, okay. "Maintaining a stable environment is essential for his preservation. If conditions exceed the recommended range, an alarm is automatically triggered. So if the humidity goes up, the temperature goes up, or if it gets too low, which is unlikely, the British Museum has an ongoing commitment to the care and research of the human remains in its collection." So they take this really, really, really seriously. And I will be sure it's just striking. I don't know what it is about like an ancient body, but it's a striking thing to witness. Nearby are just an incredible amount of Egyptian artifacts, Ptah-shepses, things that talk about the Greeks in Egypt. It's something you can really get lost in. If you appreciate history, you can really get lost there. They even have the mummy of Cleopatra. Unfortunately, it's not the Cleopatra that you're thinking of. It's Cleopatra, daughter of Candace. So this Cleopatra was part of the Cornelius Polius family. It's Emperor Trajan days, which I'm pretty sure that's the same Trajan who is connected to my favorite typeface. This is a total like tangent, not in my notes, nerd out. If you like typefaces, look up Trajan Pro. Trajan Pro is an awesome, legendary. If you want a font that looks like a legendary font, or I should say typeface, because a font is actually a typeface at a certain size. Sorry, went to design school. I can't help it. If you want a typeface that's legendary, look up Trajan Pro. It's based on the letters on Trajan's column. Pretty sure it's the same Trajan. There are so many mummies in this exhibit that if you like mummies, you won't want to leave. They'll have to pull you away. They'll have to get the bobbies are going to come in. They're going to pull you right out. And then you're going to go to Bobby jail for being in. Do most people know what that is? Bobby is slang for a British policeman. You probably know that though. I don't know. I mean, my audience is really varied, I imagine. So I want to be as clear as I can be. I also learned, as kind of a afterglow of Stonehenge, there were quite a few Stonehenge books and little artifacts. It was pretty interesting. I learned that Stonehenge started as a cemetery before they put up all of the stones. And it has this obviously like thousands of years of history. So there was a guy named William Stukely, Stukeley, who surveyed Stonehenge and Avebury. It was pretty cool. So I felt very vindicated. I've gone to the two coolest henges. No one's made a hinge like that ever since. And he mapped all the burials and earthenworks, and he published the results in this, I'm going to say, kick-ass book that I got to look at. Only one page of it, but I'll put that in the photos bonus for the members as well. Members at $10 a month get all the accompanying photos to each of these episodes, and it helps support the show. It helps things keep going on and on and on. And you can, of course, cancel at any time. No pressure. Not everybody can afford it, but I like to provide extra bonuses to people who have been part of this Patreon there are people that have been on this Patreon for over 7 years now, and that really means a lot to me. So I was really intrigued and delighted to learn that even when this guy dedicated his life, it seemed like, he was like, talk about the super nerd in the best way possible for how these temples, these Druidic temples, formed. And a plaque explained that William Stukely believed that these Celts, who were led by their priests, which were the Druids, he believed they were descendants of Noah. Yeah, that Noah. And that these Druids leading the Celts civilized the Briton tribes even before the Romans showed up. And this is regarded as a pretty romantic vision, whatever. Yeah, he believed the two Roman figures here were Celtic and used them as the basis for some of the depictions of early Britons. This bronze medal of Stonehenge on the right, this just cool little, it looks more like a coin than a medal, one of a kind, that is, they should really let you stamp your penny to look like this because it's the coolest little medal. 1765, March 4th. Oh, also, I need to mention this. Right around this time, this is important. So many of you probably know, I came across an artifact that actually had something inaccurate. Yeah, it was something inaccurate. I'm not joking. I was disappointed. Let me just double check. This is a good example of how things can get lost when they're being translated from one culture to another, and when the experience of a material or a substance is being communicated but not being understood in the context that it's intended to be understood. And maybe that's overly fancy for what I'm about to say, but that's how I feel about this. I came across a striking ceremonial carved wooden bowl from Hawaii. And many of you probably know that I lived on the islands of Hawaii for a total of 5 years. And I was forever changed and inspired and in awe of those islands. There's no other thing to say than those 8 islands have a very special energy to them. There are things that have happened there that I feel very sad about when I think about it. There have been a lot of interests and a lot of investment, and people have to actively fight to preserve the Hawaiian culture. And this is true for, many, let's say, tropical islands that have become popular tourist destinations. It really seems like it's hard not to have some kind of conflict of interest. But they have this gorgeous bowl that was presented as a gift. Yes, right. So they have this gorgeous bowl that I'll include, and I'll even include a photo of the mistake, which bothers me. And it says, and I quote, "This bowl from the 1700s from the Hawaiian Islands is used to serve ava, also called kava, an intoxicating drink. This bowl is decorated with pearl shell and sections of boar's tusk. A Hawaiian chief presented it to Captain Charles Clerke during Cook's third Pacific voyage. Clerke bequeathed it to Banks, who gave it to the British Museum in 1780. Can you guess what the inaccurate bit is there? Ava is not intoxicating. I've had ava dozens of times. Ava, you could drink 3 liters of ava and drive, no problem. You would be relaxed. But calling ava an intoxicating drink, I feel it's only something someone would say if they heard it second or third hand. So I do want to point that out. I don't think it's accurate, but a lot of people have never had ava, so it's outside of their experience. But if you've had ava, let me know in the comments. I want to hear your opinion on this. But you'd have to. Ava is so. If you don't know what ava is, so ava is there's this plant called a kava plant, and they grind up the root. It has a mild neurological effect. It's true, but it's not even in the same. It's not even on the same planet as something like alcohol. Like it knows. It doesn't know about the word alcohol. It's like if alcohol is a grumpy old man, Ava is a 6-year-old girl who likes to draw pictures. That, they're like totally different demographics of drink. I really don't think it's fair to call it intoxicating, but I don't debate people on the internet. I'm just saying. But I will debate a plaque in the British Museum, as you've just learned. So I do feel like it's worth correcting that, just for posterity, I suppose. Speaking of drinks, accidental segue, I came across a lot of Greek vases, and I was pretty amused to find that, and they said this on the sign for the vase, which now we don't know how much we can trust that, but these vases, many of them were regarded as wine coolers. And I suddenly had this image of, oh my God, how many of these fancy vases, and they're gorgeous, right? I mean, they're black and orange, basically, black and tan. They're very striking, beautifully painted. And I just had this vision of like, how many of these were just like for parties, I really think that if we were able to go back in time, I think a lot of the mystique of some of these objects that we have, I think we would feel very differently about some of these things when you realize, oh, that was just a cup from a bender or something. I mean, they're still beautiful objects, but maybe I'm being silly. But they're definitely works of art. But I think that some of the use cases for some of these objects, it's very easy to regard them with this mythical status because we've never seen these things actually used. Have you ever thought about that? Like so many of these beautiful objects that we see, we can't necessarily readily imagine them being used. We've only seen them regarded as these objects of antiquity that we're venerating and putting on a pedestal. We don't realize, like, yeah, somebody was like drinking wine out of that and they were, acting really silly, even though it's a beautiful thing. A rich person, in the case of these Greek vases, anyway, doesn't matter. Let's go the other way around. Let's talk about the Great Dish. I definitely recommend looking up the Mildenhall Great Dish. It's a gorgeous bronze dish. I also recommend, if you're interested in art, one of my favorite things that I saw was the Geyer Anderson cat. It's not an orientation thing. I think it was these two people's last names, Gayer-Anderson cat. It's this bronze and silver plaque, Egyptian cat. Holy crap. It will be in the bonus photos for this episode for supporters, but if you can't support, you can just look it up. I'm sure it's around 600 BC. One of the coolest cat statues. Okay, that's all. It's not a very interesting comment, but it's very easy to get lost in this museum, just in your own head. There's an entire, half of the first floor, not really quite half, but it feels like it, that's just Greek. You're just wandering through Greek friezes and looking at these incredible carvings of centaurs and Lapiths fighting. Lapiths are the people who are trying to kill the centaurs. I was stunned at the level of detail, even though these objects are, many of them are 2,000-3,000 years old. I was just so inspired by the incredible creativity that spanned such a vast amount of time. I returned the following day after going to a couch surfing meetup that night. I met some nice people, but I was looking at my calendar. I was like, I'm not going to be able to make it next week because next week I'm going to be in Scotland. That's what this was kind of building up to. But I returned the following afternoon. Yes, I went to the British Museum 2 afternoons in a row because I'm that kind of nerd. The Islam exhibit was also beautiful. They have these sort of Arabic mesh, like a grate in front of the windows in that part of the museum. It's the kind of museum that you could go to every day for a month and still feel like you're scratching the surface. Sincerely. It's like time travel. It's the closest you can get to time travel without breaking the laws of physics. So when I start these episodes, I never really know what I'm going to talk the most about. I just sort of go with my intuition and go with my heart and my gut. But I think that's a quick little overview of the British Museum. I will recommend, I have another tip for you. There is a person who specializes in European travel, who you may have heard of, called Rick Steves. Rick Steves, which I think you can figure out how to spell that. Rick Steves had a show, I think he still has a show on US PBS stations, the public broadcasting stations. And he also has an app, which I will endeavor to check and see if it's still available. If it is, I will put that in the show notes. This app has tons of free audio guides. So this is another little budget money-saving tip. He has got free audio guides for many of the major museums in Europe. And I had a lot of fun using his audio guides to explore the British Museum. I found it very enriching. The one downside, and I will warn you, if a part of the museum is closed for renovations, as it was when I was there, it will be a little tricky, but it'll pick up and you'll figure out where you are. But that's the only snag you can potentially run into. But you'll probably be okay. So the Rick Steves app, it's on Android and iOS, and I can double check. And if that's still available, I'll put that in the show notes for this episode. So I was feeling very enriched. I felt like I just traveled to another millennia, and I found myself wandering not too far, in fact, but far enough, over by the city of Westminster again. And this was cool because I got to be on the other side of the River Thames this time, and I got to get up close and personal with Big Ben. I said this episode would be bookended by Big Ben. Say that 10 times fast, and it's true. I didn't have any really expectations for Big Ben. I mean, like a lot of people who are Generation Y, which is the name of a generation. We're right after Generation X, born, 12 years after those guys. Everybody knows about Generation X, but Generation Y, we don't get any attention. We just call us millennials. You know what? Millennial is not actually a generation. That's a whole category. There are several, like 2.5 generations are covered by a very vague term people call millennials. Like many people in my generation, the first time I saw a depiction of Big Ben, if you grew up in America, was probably, and you can disagree with me on this, but I think it's true for a lot of people who grew up in America, was probably in a cartoon called The Great Mouse Detective, or any number of animated things that happened in London. And you go, well, that seems interesting. It's a big clock. None of these, I don't even think photos really do this thing justice. Big Ben is actually beautiful. Nobody told me. I'm sure it was helped by the fact that the afternoon sun was just hitting it perfectly. This sucker is, I'm pretty sure it's gold plated. Someone can yell at me in the comments about that. Please don't. This is a deal in which I share what's coming from my heart, and I only allow positive feedback. It's not true. It's totally not fair. You know what I mean. Be civil in the comments. But this is just me sharing my authentic self with the world, which can be rough if you've ever done it before. It can be real risky. But the sun was hitting Big Ben in quite a lovely way, and the whole little spires and everything was very gold and very lovely, and I had a nice time photographing the heck out of it with my Olympus TG6 camera, which only had a 4-time optical zoom. Olympus is not a sponsor, but they should be. And yeah, I just had a really lovely time. I think this is probably the best one. There's two in here that are pretty good. I'm going to save this to put in the bonus content. And the sun was just hitting it at just the right spot. It was about 6:45. Now, remember, this is June at 51 degrees north latitude. So sunset's going to happen at like 7:30. So the timing was excellent. The whole area around Parliament Square Garden is really lovely. It's a very chill place, and you can enjoy a variety of statues of famous people, like Nelson Mandela. I'm going to include this photo too. It's pretty funny. They have a great statue of Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Gandhi, depending on your preference. Winston Churchill. This one I think was the largest. Churchill, Winston Churchill. That's all I got to say. Really conveys the weight in which he moved through the world. He's got his cane. And I even had a bit of time to skip through Trafalgar Square, also known as Charing Cross, regarded as the middle of London. And all of this was, and the lighting was terrible, and I didn't really get a good photo of anything. And it was actually, honestly, a mess. Trafalgar Square looked like it was being torn apart and blown up. I don't know what's going on. And that's probably why I don't have that many photos. I didn't want to stay out too late, though, because I had to leave pretty early the next morning because I had purchased a bus ticket. And this is my last and final tip after doing extensive research. My last and final tip, not of my life, of this episode. Megabus is probably going to be your best bet if you want to go more than like an hour or two out of London. It's going to be your best deal. And if you go during the middle of the week, you have a good chance of not a full bus. I was the only person on the first level of this bus on the way up to Scotland. I couldn't believe it. It's better than you would think. It's better than you would think, and it's by far the best deal. They even have like a little sink in the bus, and I won't spoil it. I'll talk about my journey to Scotland and the green journey to Scotland and the delightful couch surfing host that I had there, and the visit to the gorgeous cemetery, and my time in, let's make it a surprise where I stopped first in Scotland. But by now I felt like I was really starting to get into the groove. My body had fully adapted. I'd been in the UK, we'll say, just to keep it inclusive, for about almost 2 weeks at this point. Yeah, about 2 weeks. And I was finally adjusting to all of the things I was asking my body to adjust to, like a different climate, time zone, and just getting used to moving around a lot, getting used to sleeping on, new beds every few days because I was moving around. I was having an adventure. I was going outside my comfort zone, and I maintain and repeat ad nauseum that travel is the most potent classroom, and I believe the most inspiring classroom that Earth has to offer. Thank you so much for listening to Wanderous. My name is Andrew Crusoe. If you enjoyed this show, please follow me for free on Patreon if you're not already. If you are, follow me on Spotify because it's the best way to not miss an episode, and I would really appreciate the redundancy. It helps the numbers on both sides. And that's free as well to follow me on Spotify. That link is on the Patreon, and I'll actually put it in the show notes for this as well. And if you want to support this show, you can support this show really at any level, but if you support it at $10 or more, you will get the photos that I include with every episode. If you support this show for $20 a month, you will get spicy episodes of the show that I will never share publicly. So that's what's going on. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Mahalo nui loa.